It's Red Eye Radio. Talk about everything from politics to social issues and news of the day. Whether you're up late or you're just starting your day, welcome to the show. From the Uniden America Studios. For Gary McNamara and Eric Harley, Dan Mandis, this is Red Eye Radio.
866-90 Red Eye is the phone number, 866-907-3339. Gary and Eric return Sunday night, Monday morning. Looking forward to that. I'm on Real Clear Politics right now, looking at the averages of the battleground states. And Donald Trump is ahead in every single battleground state at this point. They have Minnesota in here as a battleground state. I'm not entirely certain why. But you've got Michigan, you've got Pennsylvania, you've got Wisconsin, Arizona, North Carolina, you've got Georgia. Donald Trump is ahead in every single one. Now, Pennsylvania, they talk about how, this is going to run through Pennsylvania. The election is going to run through Pennsylvania. Donald Trump is up 0.5% there. Minnesota is the only one where, I don't know why they're calling Minnesota battleground state, but whatever. Harris is at up 4.7%. Not a huge deal because, I just assume that that's going to go to Harris Walz. Ohio finds Donald Trump up 7.4%. Nevada, Texas, New Mexico, Virginia. It looks like Trump is ahead in Ohio, Nevada, Texas. Now, New Mexico and Virginia, you do see those for Kamala Harris. But, all of New Mexico and Virginia, I don't know if I call those battleground states. I guess they are. But really, all eyes are going to be on Pennsylvania, Wisconsin as well, and all the other ones that we typically talk about. You got Wisconsin, Arizona, North Carolina, Georgia, Michigan is also a big one. So, and the thing that's important to note is that with all of these numbers for all of these battleground states, realize that does not include, those numbers do not include people who have seen the Bret Baier interview with Harris. Now, once those numbers get worked in, I think you're going to see even more support for Donald Trump. Guy called up earlier, and it reminded me of a story I did a while ago locally on WTN in Nashville. And I want to share it with you here on Red Eye Radio. CNN did a segment. Guy called up earlier in the show today, and he talked about how kids, they learn about politics from their parents. And I will take it a step further. Kids learn how to behave, by and large, from their parents, or at least they should. CNN did this segment on kids and politics, and I thought it was really interesting. I really enjoyed the segment, believe it or not, on CNN, because, we are just as polarized these days as we ever have been. And so CNN does this segment to see if kids are as polarized as their parents are, and America is right now. This was on Anderson Cooper's show, and, they talked about kids and how they feel about the different presidential candidates, including, of course, Kamala Harris.
What's the first word that pops into your head when you hear the name Kamala Harris?
Liar.
Liar. I would say the kid does speak the truth, right? Now, this, again, was on CNN, but to be honest, it wasn't a terrible segment riddled with anti-Donald Trump bias. Yet some of these kids, they clearly not fans of Kamala Harris.
Which one do you think is more selfish?
Selfish? Probably her.
Kamala Harris?
Yeah, because girls are a little bit dramatic sometimes.
Okay, so these are 10 and 11-year-olds. And by the way, if you know anything about Kamala Harris, you know that she actually is quite dramatic. So the obvious thing here is these kids are hearing all of this from their parents or their friends' parents. And so I do wonder, when I'm listening to all of this, I wonder how much politics seeps into everyday conversations in homes across America. What are the kids hearing across America? What do kids hear in your house if you've got kids? I've got a 10-year-old in my house, and he is, we're raising him to be a conservative. And so he does hear myself and my wife, we talk about politics a lot, and he gets an earful of conservatism.
What's the first word that pops into your head when you hear Donald Trump?
Pure evil.
Pure evil. By the way, that's 2 words, kid, not 1.
And do you think that people in the United States are ready to have another 4 years of Donald Trump if he's reelected?
No.
Why not?
Because, like, I feel like all he does is, like, complain and, like, yell.
So, I mean, obviously, again, these are out of the mouths of babes, and so they don't really obviously clearly know much about the issues of the day. There is lots to complain about in this country, though, but I thought that was an interesting perception from that little girl who finds that Donald Trump is pure evil. Because when you talk about what's going on in America right now, there is a lot to complain about. There is a lot to yell about. But the point is that when we think about politics, no matter what side that we're on, we oftentimes think about our kids and we think about our world and the world that they're going to inherit from us. I just became a grandfather a couple of weeks ago. I'm 56 years old. I've got a brand new grandchild. He's a boy, and I love him to death. I do fear what his world is going to be like when he turns 18. Now, it's interesting. For Donald Trump supporters, we see our nation as being overrun with illegal aliens and crime, right? And that is true. A lot of us are spending a lot of money as well, more on groceries and so on and so forth. And so we also see our rights being taken away. So if you're a Trump supporter, we've got a long list of things that we're frustrated about. And a lot of us, you know, we do complain a lot because we do see America on the wrong track. But the vast, vast majority of Americans do see America on the wrong track. These kids, though, they see Donald Trump in their own way. Not all the kids were against Donald Trump. Not all the kids, obviously, were for Donald Trump.
Donald Trump, he's given his life and his heart.
Yeah, you heard that kid, a Donald Trump supporter. He's given his life and his heart. And that is true. And his fortune as well. Donald Trump has lost hundreds of millions of dollars, and he's the only president who is worth less, far less, as a matter of fact, than when he went into office. And now here he is. He's lost a lot of money. He's made a lot of sacrifices. And part of that is all of the massive amount of legal issues that the former president faces as part of the lawfare brought on by the Democrats. And so these kids, though, they don't care about any of that.
32% of all students brought up the former president's legal issues. In general, kids who said they'd support Donald Trump did not see his legal problems as a disqualifier.
Should he be president again still?
Yeah, like we can say, for example, JFK. He cheated on his wife, but, like, people still loved him. George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, both slave owners. Being a slave owner is really bad. It's a really bad thing. But they still had 2 terms. So I think even though Trump has done bad stuff, he still deserves to run for president.
You know, it's interesting because a lot of these kids had no issue with Donald Trump running, even though he was and I'm going to air quote here, convicted felon. This kid didn't like Donald Trump, but thought that he was okay to run for president.
Let's say Trump because he's a convicted felon.
Do you think it's okay for somebody who is a convicted felon to become president of the United States?
Yes.
Remember that the media used the term convicted felon a lot, and so did these kids. Clearly what's going on these days with the media and the Democrats and their branding of Donald Trump as an, air quote, convicted felon had an impression on these kids, obviously passed down from their parents. But what about race and gender? How big of a deal is it for these kids that Kamala Harris would be the first black female president? Is that a big deal?
So do you think it matters more to voters that she's a woman or that she's a person of color?
I don't really care about what color she is. I just care about the personality and what she wants to do.
Do you think people would be bothered at all by the fact that Kamala Harris is half black and half
No,
Indian American?
no, because Barack Obama was elected twice, 2 terms, served all 8 years.
Yeah, there you go. Race doesn't matter to these kids. And typically, as you know, oftentimes race doesn't matter to children. When you're born, you see everybody the same. It's only when people get older that they start finding their biases for whatever reason. Not everybody does, but you know how that works. But the opinions on this were really varied as far as race and, should that have an impact on the election. This black girl was all about Donald Trump. She loved him.
It'd be good for us to have a black woman as president for the first time in history.
Yeah.
But my vote's kind of still on Trump.
There you go. They also, by the way, not surprisingly, found that kids in blue states, follow the bouncing ball, kids in blue states had more polarizing opinions of Donald Trump than other kids. Now, this child is from New Jersey.
Donald Trump, he did bad things. He's like Hitler.
He only wanted to be president so that he can just control everybody.
Trump is supporting January 6th now. I remember that January 6th, it was a bunch of Republicans believing Trump. I feel like they thought Trump was a god. People got arrested. I think one officer died afterwards. That was a big day.
You know, the one audio bite all of those comments from those kids horrify me. But there's one kid.
Donald Trump, he did bad things. He's like Hitler.
The kid that says that Donald Trump is like Hitler. If I'm that kid's teacher, I'm going to take that kid, I'm going to take him aside, and I'm going to say, can I tell you what Adolf Hitler actually did? Can I give you an education? Because clearly your parents are a couple of idiots. Because that kind of language, that does come from the parents. And so when I heard that Donald Trump is like Hitler, it was really sad, obviously. Now, Anderson Cooper, hearing all of this, and the psychologist, they talk about all of this, and they talk about the harsh rhetoric that you just heard from these kids. And you'll notice, if you watch the piece, and you can find it on my X feed, at Dan Mandis Show, that the criticisms of Kamala Harris are not nearly as harsh as the criticisms for Donald Trump. And so Anderson Cooper and the psychologist, they talk about all of this divide in America, whether it is the adults or the kids. And why is it that all of these kids that are not Donald Trump fans have such a polarizing view?
The study found that these Democrat-leaning kids were about 9 times more likely to express negative emotions about Donald Trump than Republican-leaning kids were about Kamala Harris. Why might that be? Psychologist Ashley Landrum has some ideas.
So Donald Trump is a very polarizing figure, and it's very possible that the kids are reacting to their parents reacting to Donald Trump being a very different kind of political figure than what we've seen before. So do the red state kids hold as strong of attitudes? Well, not when we're talking about Kamala Harris. In part, that could be because they don't know that much about her.
Well, I think it's also because you have kids whose parents are from the party of acceptance and diversity, who are constantly blasting and complaining about Donald Trump and calling him Hitler, saying awful things. It sounds to me like their reporting shows that Donald Trump supporters are more accepting of others with opposing viewpoints. Now, remember what this psychologist said.
Do the red state kids hold as strong of attitudes? Well, not when we're talking about Kamala Harris. In part, that could be because they don't know that much about her.
All right, fine. But what about allowing kids to go to the home of someone who supports the other candidate? So if you're a Donald Trump supporter, would you allow your kids to go to a Harris supporting household? And about, Kamala Harris supporters. If you're a Kamala Harris supporter, would you allow your kids to go to the home of a Donald Trump supporter? This is really interesting.
The study found that Republican-leaning kids were more open to visiting a Democrat-supporting household. The Democrat-leaning kids were about 5 times more likely to say they would not want to go to a pro-Trump house.
Wow. So Democrat kids, by and large, don't want to go to a Trump household, but Trump households would be more than willing to go to the house of Kamala Harris supporters. Does that really surprise you? It doesn't surprise me in the least, especially after we've seen all that we've seen over the last 3.5 years. I'm going to play that one audio bite one more time from Anderson Cooper because I think it makes a really important point.
The study found that Republican-leaning kids were more open to visiting a Democrat-supporting household. The Democrat-leaning kids were about 5 times more likely to say they would not want to go to a pro-Trump house.
Well, I'm going to leave it right there because that last statement, at least to me, it speaks volumes. 866-90-RED-EYE, 866-907-3339. Dan Mandis here on Red Eye Radio.
This morning's USDA Farm Report is brought to you by Howe's Products. Tested, trusted, guaranteed since 1920.
How has hot, dry weather of recent weeks across much of the country impacted agriculture? USDA meteorologist Brad Rippey says on the plus side,
that has been absolutely ideal for summer crop dry down and harvest activities. That is easily reflected in all of our crop progress numbers across most major crops, including corn and soybeans. Very rapid maturation in recent weeks, and a vast amount of corn and soybeans have been harvested the last couple of weeks as well as they reach full maturity.
Yet for recently planted crops like winter wheat and cover crops,
that is a concern to see the ongoing dryness because we have really depleted topsoil moisture across much of the country outside of the hurricane zones in the southeast. So there are concerns for getting this winter wheat crop established properly before it heads into dormancy in a few more weeks.
Hot, dry weather has also created declining water levels on the Mississippi River and its tributaries, and increasing concerns about potential impacts to transportation and barge traffic. I'm Rod Bain reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
This report brought to you by Cenex Fuels and Lubes.
Lines open for your calls. 866-90-RED-EYE on Red Eye Radio.
$866-90-RED-EYE is the phone number, and that is where we find Brian in Kansas City. Brian, how are you?
I'm fine, thank you. Real quick, with the Hamas leader getting killed over in Gaza, I was curious as far as, do you believe it'll hurt her with the Palestinian community, or will she benefit anything vote-wise with the Jewish community?
I don't think so. I appreciate the call, though. What I would say is that if anything, it would hurt her with the Palestinians and all that, with the Democrat Party. But for me, I think that you're either pro-Israel or you're against Israel. It's my opinion that Kamala Harris is not necessarily a supporter of Benjamin Netanyahu. I think she says what she has to do to survive as a politician. So she'll say things like, I support Israel and their right to defend themselves, but they have to do it the right way. Well, what is the right way? And that's the thing. The problem that the Democrat Party has is that they have a lot of people within their party that are anti-Semitic and they're anti-Israel and they are pro-Hamas. That is just a fact. And so for Kamala Harris, I think as far as her support within the Democrat Party, I think the bottom line is that this is a party that doesn't know right from wrong. Because if you look at the situation between, for example, Israel and Hamas, clearly the Israelis were attacked last year, and that was a terrorist attack. And anyone who says that Israel does not have a right to defend themselves after that kind of an attack without any equivocation, well, then they clearly don't know right from wrong.
Red Eye Radio from the Uniden America Studios. Now, for Gary McNamara and Eric Harley, here is Dan Mandis.
866-90 Red Eye is the phone number, and that is where we find Tom calling from Illinois. Tom, how are you?
Yes, I'd like to make a comment in regards to the border in terms of border security. I think we're at a point now where the only way to get control over it is to use the military, probably have build the wall, of course, and then have tanks there and armed security like they do in many other countries, like Viktor Orban does in Hungary, like the Israelis do, and like Eisenhower did in the 50s. He had a crisis, and he used the military, and he used the military for mass deportation as well.
I have no problem using the military to guard the border. I have no problem utilizing the military to destroy the drug cartels in Mexico. I have no problem utilizing the military to protect America. I simply don't. And so for, Donald Trump, I don't know if that's what he's going to do, what he ultimately does, but he's got a big job ahead of him. If he's talking about, which he is, mass deportations, he's got to figure out what resources he can use to, one, protect our border, and two, how does he get this mass deportation? How does he execute that? I don't even know. I think the majority of the American people, they do want the mass deportations, but I think most importantly to the American people, and I know that it's most important to me, is I want the gangbanger criminals out. If you're a gangbanger and you're from Venezuela or Guatemala or, MS-13, Tren de Aragua, you got to start with those people first and get them the heck out of here, because those are the ones that are killing innocent Americans. And, the problem, Tom, and I'll give you the last word on this if you have anything else to say about it, but the problem that Trump has is that if he wins, and I'm, spending some time looking at the battleground states, he's got the edge in most, if not all of them, and certainly the most important ones, is that he's still going to have to deal with the Democrats. And he's still going to have to deal with, I would say, probably an even more triggered Democrat and the Democrat Party and the media as well. So even if he's elected for a second term, he's still going to have a lot of challenges.
Yeah, and the progressive movement in America and across the world is against him, so it's going to be an uphill battle. It's doable, but it's going to be awfully hard, and it's important that American citizens get behind him, whether they vote for him or not, because it is possible to beat the world progressives. You can do this. It's tough, but it can be done.
Well, we need the Senate. We need to retain the House. We need strong majorities in both. And really what needs to happen, Tom, and I appreciate the call, what we need to see in November, we need to see a statement election. And what I mean by that, and I think it's fairly obvious, but we need a victory with Donald Trump so incredibly decisive that nobody can say, well, he barely won, or there can be no question. This needs to be such a massive win that it is a what do they call it, a referendum election, whatever it is, where it is clearly so decisive and such a massive win for Donald Trump that it's a message, and it's a message to the Democrats that this is the way that we want our country run, like Donald Trump is running on. Now, will the Democrats take it that way? Of course not. Why? Because the Democrats are a bunch of crybabies. 866-90-RED-EYE is the phone number, 866-90-RED-EYE. Let's say hello to, this is Kevin calling from Georgia on Red Eye Radio. Hey, Kevin.
Hey, Dan, how are you this morning?
I'm all right. Go ahead, sir.
Hey, just wanted to say great job filling in. Enjoyed listening to you, and I'm going to do my best to find the radio station that you are on down here.
Oh, well, very good. Thank you. Let me tell you right now, Kevin, just before I forget, it's 99.7 WTN. I'm in Nashville. I'm the morning show, and we're on all the streaming apps. And you can also, if you're If you're one of those folks who likes to watch a radio show, we're also on YouTube and Facebook and at 99.7 at WTN.com. Okay, thank you for the opportunity to plug myself. What do you got?
Well, get your opinion on something. I've talked to a lot of people down here in South Georgia who are still voting for Harris. And my comments to them are, you know, prices are higher across the board than they were when Trump was in office. What are your reasons not for voting for Trump? And close to 95% of the people that I've talked to quote personal reasons, not a single, not his political stance on the border or the economy or nothing. And then, you know, I explained, hey, and they say he's a liar, and they say he's a womanizer, and he's a racist, and I'm thinking, okay, he's not perfect, but he's done better. You know what you're going to get because he's been president before.
Right.
But yet they're still voting for Harris, and I cannot, for the life of me, wrap my mind around why. And I think the turnout, the record turnout of early voting in Georgia has sent a message that maybe some of them will come around.
Well, let me ask you, because well, Kevin, let me ask you, is there an indication, because I know there's a lot of early voting out there, but is the early voting based on Trump's support or Trump hatred? Do we know yet in Georgia?
In my personal opinion, from just in my area in Georgia, and I'm in South Georgia, I mean, I'm so close to Florida, you could throw a rock and hit the state of Florida. It's Trump support in the part of Georgia I'm in.
Okay.
So, you know.
Well, you know what I would say, Kevin, and it's an interesting conversation. And I talked about this earlier in the program this morning, where you have to make a decision as to how much you really want to try to convince other people to think the way that you do. I just don't know if you can reach people who, if they don't get it by now, that the ways of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris have destroyed the country in the last 3.5 years. If they don't understand that by now, then, I mean, what are you going to say that's going to convince them? If seeing, you know, billions of our dollars, hundreds of billions of our dollars going to Ukraine, all of these illegal aliens coming across our southern border, innocent American people being killed by these illegal aliens that Kamala Harris allowed to come over our border. We've got gang bangers taking over apartment complexes in Colorado and other places as well, I'm sure. I mean, if they don't get that, then I mean, my shoulders are around my ears. I don't know if there's any hope for these people.
Yes, sir. And, you know, thinking about it, I believe a lot of them are uninformed because a lot down here in South Georgia, where I'm at again, the border is a big thing. And they say, well, they're trying to build the border, but the Republicans are blocking it. And I said, do you understand the border bill? I said, over 70% of the money that's in this border bill is going to another country for foreign aid. It's not going to build the border. It's going to aid other countries. So, of course, we're going to block that. You know.
Well, and the other thing, and Kevin, the other thing that I would tell them is that the border bill was also killed by Democrats, and there was, I think, 5 or 6 Democrats that in the Senate that voted against the border bill. There's also a bill from the House of Representatives, H.R. 2, that was a much stronger bill that Chuck Schumer in the Senate, the leader in the Senate, refused to even bring to the table. And that was a really strong border bill that the Democrats refused to even acknowledge in the Senate, even though it passed in the House of Representatives. Also, and I don't need to give you talking points, clearly you're smart, but the other thing I would say is that the reason why we've had all of these illegal aliens coming across our southern border isn't because the border bill failed. No, it's because of Joe Biden's executive orders. He's got like 93, 94 of them in total that completely dismantled Donald Trump's rather secure border when he was in office. Joe Biden did away with Remain in Mexico, put a moratorium on deportations. There's a bunch of things that he did, stopped building the wall. And he literally said during the primary debate, Come one, come all. If you want to come here and ask for amnesty, come on, we're going to give it to you. And so that's what Joe Biden did. So those are, I think, really effective talking points. But the people that you're talking to, Kevin, in South Georgia, I don't think they care because they're so riddled with Trump derangement syndrome that they refuse to listen to reason and logic. And I think that is one of the big time symptoms of being infused with Trump derangement syndrome. They can't see past their hatred. And it's really sad. I mean, when reason and logic leaves your head because you have a hatred for a guy because he says things that you don't like and he tweeted things that you didn't like, that is just insane because you're letting your common sense be blocked by your blind hatred. And I can't imagine people living like that. I feel sorry for them, to be honest with you.
You know, the other thing I wanted to comment on, Dan, is I was listening earlier to the kids. You know, I become voter eligible Reagan's second term when he was running for his second term, and I have voted Republican. God forgive me for that slip of the tongue. Ever since. But I would not, and I try to teach my kids because I firmly believe, and a lot of people will agree with this. Racism is taught.
Of course,
it's taught. You're not born with it; it is taught.
Mm-hmm.
So I teach my kids: don't form your opinions on what Daddy and Mommy believe and what other people believe. Do your research, form your own opinions, and I want them to experience all of it. So I would not have a problem with them not only going to a friend's house that support Harris, Democrats, or whoever, but I wouldn't have a problem with them spending the night and having fun with their friends because you need all your information, whether it's Democrat or Republican or whatever the situation is. You need all your information, and I'm not going to keep my kids from getting that.
Well,
I appreciate you taking my call.
All right, Kevin, thanks very much. You know, my one response to that, my response to that would be, and if you missed it, maybe check out the podcast, but I had a segment where it was CNN. I'm playing audio from a CNN segment and Anderson Cooper, and they're looking at kids and how they relate to politics. And what Kevin is referring to is that kids who were pro-Kamala Harris and anti-Donald Trump, they would not want to visit the home of a Trump supporter or a Trump supporting family. However, kids from Trump supporting families would visit the house of a Kamala Harris supporter, and it was like 5-1. And so clearly the party that embraces diversity, people think the Democrats like to say that that's their party, but it's clearly not. And then as Kevin just said, he's a Trump supporter. I'm a Trump supporter. I would have no problem if my son went to the home of a Kamala Harris supporter, but it sounds like they wouldn't accept him if you use that CNN segment as any kind of a barometer. But, you know, when it comes to allowing your kid to experience everything, I mean, I agree with Kevin. You don't want to teach I don't want to get on a soapbox, but you don't want to teach your kids to be intolerant. That's what the other side does. And Kevin, again, I appreciate the call. 866-90 Red Eye is the phone number, 866-907-3339. Dan Mandis here on Red Eye Radio.
Get in touch with Red Eye Radio, toll free at 866-90 Red Eye.
Red Eye Radio. Phone number is 866-90 Red Eye, 866-907-3339. Dan Mandis in for Gary and Eric. They return Sunday night, Monday morning. It's always fun to guest host here on Red Eye Radio. You can find out more about me on the Dan Mandis Show X page or also Facebook page as well. You can find me on the socials at Dan Mandis Show. And if you'd follow me on X, I will follow you back. Want to leave you with a couple of really great jokes from Donald Trump last night at the Al Smith dinner. This was really funny, and yes, a lot of these are actually going viral.
Chuck Schumer is here looking very glum. Doesn't he look glum? It looks glum. But look on the bright side, Chuck, considering how woke your party has become. If Kamala loses, you still have a chance to become the first woman president.
Very, very funny. Again, that is Donald Trump, his little stand-up routine. And also this one, also one of my favorites.
A major issue in this race is child care, and Kamala has put forward a concept of a plan. A lot of people don't like it. The only piece of advice I would have for her in the event that she wins would be not to let her husband, Doug, anywhere near the nannies. Just keep them away.
There you go. Donald Trump last night at the Al Smith dinner. Thanks for listening to Red Eye Radio.
This is Red Eye Radio on Westwood One.